Heidi ho, and welcome back to the show, everyone. Today is June 5th, 2024, and this is episode 216. Thanks so much to Mailtrap for sponsoring the show. We'll tell you more about them later in the show, but for now, my wonderful co-host, Mr. Michael Dorinda, with his Lakers jersey, Lakers warm-up, not jersey, his Lakers warm-up on. How's it going, my friend?
No, it's a jacket. It's going well. I feel like I'm going to complain about how cold it is for the next 4 or 5 months. So let's breeze past that. Let's talk. Was it this Laravel news? No, it was not. It was our other podcast that we talked about the basketball. So maybe we can skip the basketball talk.
We can skip the basketball.
All I'm going to say is Dallas in 6.
Okay, Dallas in 6. Hey, since we're going to skip basketball, I'll ask you real quick. Have you ever played pickleball?
No, I know what it is. I've seen about the place that it's becoming a thing here, but I've never played.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. So my brother-in-law just texted me. He was here for Memorial Day in the U.S., and he taught me how to play pickleball, and it was really fun. And he just won a tournament, I guess, at a conference that he was at. So that's kind of cool. So they had a little mini pickleball tournament, and he won. So I was like, that's fun. So anyway, yeah, I just got a couple new pickleball paddles in the mail, and so any of you folks, we should do this at Laracon. If there's good weather in Texas and there's a pickleball court around, which I'm sure there will be, we should do a pickleball tournament. That'd be fun.
If it's not 120 degrees,
it probably will be
Dallas, but it's in August.
I know. I think that's why he did it a little bit later than usual this year, is because he wanted to give a little bit of time to cool down. So hopefully we'll see everybody there in August at Laracon. That would be really fun. Well, my friend, should we jump into it? We've got some releases to talk through. We've got some news, some packages, and some tutorials.
First time in a while.
I know. For tutorials, we've had our the writing staff here has been busy. We've got Paul Redmond, who has got a new profile photo, who's been doing some writing. He's got 2 of the 3. Let's take a look. Has he got the 3rd one as well? I don't think he does.
Allen.
This one's a little Ash Allen. Oh, Ash Allen.
Ash Allen has written a novella.
I don't know what he has. I was going to say this one's longer than the typical Paul Redmond one.
30 minutes. Yeah, 30 minutes of reading there. So
Ash Allen, he's a good one. He's a good one. Okay, so let's get into it then. Starting with releases. Laravel 11.8, a new validation rule and the ability to manually fail a command in Laravel 11.8. This week, which was the week of May 22nd, the Laravel team released version 11.8 with this new validation rule and exactly what we talked about just a moment ago. So, show events in the model show command. Wendell Adriel contributed an events section to the model show command. So this is if you type PHP artisan model : show in the command line. And what this will do is this will display any events defined on the dispatches events property. So what this does, I believe, is you can specify what events should be dispatched on a particular model event, I think is what that does. Does that sound right?
Dispatches, yeah. Like listing, yep. So but only specifically in that dispatches events property.
Correct. Only in that dispatches events property. Correct. Yep. And so you can take a look at that through the command line now, which is a nice little thing to be able to do without having to get into the code. You can just throw that right in the command line and get that data out of there. Secondly, Andrew Brown contributed a contains validation rule that checks to make sure that expected values are included in the given array of input. So, for example, here in the PR's description, we have an example that ensures that the user's IP is in the allowed IPs array. So you can also pass multiple parameters, which would require that all the parameters are present in the array of data. So you can check that out in 51.348, pull request 51.348. And so thank you to Andrew for contributing that one. Len Woodward. Is this somebody I know? Len.
Jeez.
I was thinking Leonard, but Len Woodward. Len Woodward contributed the ability to manually fail an artisan command outside of the handle command. So what you would do is inside of a method maybe called trigger failure, you can call this fail, and that will manually fail the job. So you don't have to be inside of the handle method of that command in order to make it fail. You can make it fail from anywhere within that command using this fail convenience method. The pull request has details and examples for how this could be useful over a few other existing approaches to failing early in a command. Ryan Chandler contributed a view flag to the make mail command that will create an empty blade file and configure the created mailable to use it by default. It works the same way as the existing markdown option. So it just saves you the manual step of creating and writing a blade mail template. So if you use dash dash markdown, it will do the same thing, just generate something that uses markdown. But in this case, since you're using dash dash view, it will create a blade file and configure it for that. That is all for 11.8. You can find the diff between 11.7 and 11.8 on GitHub, of course, and you can find full changelog on GitHub.
Nice. Just before we do move on to the next release, Len Woodward was tweeting the other day about this project that he's working on called Conductor, which is like a PHP version of NPX. So NPX, to my understanding, is this thing that you can install, and it allows you to run a npm dependency in your application that isn't actually installed. So it's not a dependency of your package of your application. It's not installed globally. You can just run it. It'll fetch the binaries, it'll run the script, and it'll clean up after itself. So this Conductor is the same thing. It leverages Composer to kind of pull down the thing in a way that is not going to conflict with your application structure. It'll run that binary or whatever it is, and then it'll remove it again, which is an interesting project, something that we haven't really had. I know I've seen a few attempts of it in the past, but yeah, Len's working on that. I'll include a link to his a little announcement about that in the show notes as well.
He does a good job. He's created a couple of these sort of command line utilities in the past. The other one that he did was, oh boy, what was it? Was it Whiskey? I think it was Whiskey. And so that was like Git hooks. And I remember, so we actually met at PHP Tech in Chicago last year, and he was working on that there. And the stuff that he puts out is really high quality. It's really good stuff. And so definitely check that out. And I think also he might be looking for some extra clients right now. So Len, shout out to Len if you need some good work done. I think he's got some availability.
Nice. Okay, a new minimal default exception page with dark mode support is coming in the Laravel 11.9. So the Laravel team announced the week of the 28th of May that Laravel 11 will now ship with a minimal default exception page when your application is in debug mode. The updated error page has both light and dark mode support, and it really kind of cleans up. So we've had in Laravel Sparsy's ignition package for a long time. And I think the general crux of this change from Taylor's perspective, what he was posting about on X, was that it's just something that the Laravel team can then have first party control over, so they don't have to worry about anyone else to sort of keep it updated. If there's any issues, they can just address it straight away and fall under the same kind of maintenance structure. So this collapses a lot of the vendor frames, gets them out of the way. It shows you basically the things that you actually need to see when it comes to the exceptions. You can still, of course, if you want and prefer to use the ignition package, this is just what will be the new default moving forward. And the exception page will continue to render the default Symfony view unless you've defined a custom renderer when debug mode is set to false. The update only affects new Laravel applications, so existing apps will still use Ignition if installed. And if you would like to continue using the Sparsy Ignition exception page in new Laravel apps, you can install it manually, as I said, by using a Composer require Sparsy Laravel Ignition. JMac, Jason McCreary, and Joel Claremont have contributed a new prohibitable trait along with code that prevents destructive commands from running in your applications. You can also add these to your custom artisan commands that might have destructive behavior that you don't intend to run in some environments, which usually is production. So you can attach the use prohibitable trait to your commands, and this will effectively prevent it from being run. And then you can call, for example, in a service provider somewhere, some destructive command dotop prohibit, and then pass it a truthy or a false, a Boolean evaluation in there. So in this case, you'd say some destructive command dotop prohibit, and then pass it this app is production. The Laravel framework does include some database commands that include the prohibitable trait by default. This includes dbwipe, migrate fresh, migrate refresh, and migrate reset. You can prohibit them individually or use the db facade to prohibit all of those commands in production using the db.op prohibit destructive commands and then pass it again. This thing. So this is one step further, we already have or already had in place the ability to detect if you are running in production and you would get a prompt to say you're running in production. Are you sure you want to do this? This takes
Right.
that a step further. So if you just like go yes, it will actually then prevent you from running that destructive command, irrespective of you wanting to try and force. So just that extra layer of protection. I'm sure, there is a non-zero number of people out there that have accidentally dropped a production database because they haven't been on the correct host or whatever when they were doing things. So
Yeah,
thanks
exactly.
to JMac and Joel for that one.
So, question on that. So, would you run that or have that prohibit inside of like an app service provider or something? Is that what
Yeah.
where you
Yeah,
put
you'd put
that?
it in
Okay,
there. Yep. Yep. Yeah, so we
got it.
usually put all of that kind of controlling stuff that is environment based into an app service provider, until, we need to split it into, discrete providers for different functionality or things like that. But app service provider is a good
Yeah,
place to just dump all of
I
this
didn't
stuff to
know.
begin with.
I was wondering if there was a way to do it from inside the command itself. Like it's using the command is using that prohibitable trait, and then if there was like some way to say like prohibit when, and then you would say app is in production inside of the
I,
command, so you don't have to
yeah,
go
I
looking for it
don't
somewhere else. But
think
I
in
don't
the
think so.
current iteration of it, but I think potentially it could be something that could be added later on.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Kennedy Tedesco contributed a without delay method to the curable trait. So if your job has a default delay time, you can use this in cases where you want to skip that delay instead of passing 0 to the delay method. So you just do, instead of saying dispatch new my job, arrow delay, you can now say without delay instead, and that will then circumvent. So this is useful. Like you might have some situations where you want to um, do something instantly. From Nova, you might want to dispatch a job to run straight away, or you might want to dispatch something from Tinker yourself manually. So thanks to Kennedy for that addition. But you can see the complete list of new features and updates. We'll include all of that for you in the show notes.
Very nice. Okay, let's talk about 11.10. So, third release that we've got here that we're talking about. The first item here is that Mark Erickson contributed the ability to pass a callback as a second argument to the update or insert query builder method. So, let's just break that down for a second here. Update or insert. So, what that's doing is it's looking for a value, it's looking for a record that exists in your database. And if it does, it's going to attempt to update that value with whatever it is that you're passing in. And if it does not exist, it's going to try to insert it. So, as a second argument to this update or insert now, what you can do is you can pass a closure with custom logic to determine whether or not this record exists. So again, as the name assumes, we are looking for a record here. So how are you going to look up that record to see if it exists so you can know whether you need to update or insert it? That's what you're passing in as a second argument there. So it's it's a closure. That's all it is, right? And so they've got some examples inside of the pull request and an example here in the show notes that you can take a look at as well for if you're interested in learning about that. Graham Bradley added support for soft deleted models when using explicit route model binding. So what this does is it allows the resolution of soft deleted models when using Laravel's explicit route model binding feature. If you're using implicit route model binding, what it'll do by default is if a model is soft deleted, it will return a 404 in the case that you try and look up that model, right? So if you have a user that has been soft deleted and you have that ID that's passed into that route, it will return a 404 because it is soft deleted. If you wanted to still resolve that thing, your only option was to use explicit route model binding and define it yourself to say, no, you should still return this in the case that it's soft deleted. You would have to define that binding yourself. However, now you don't have to define it explicitly anymore. You can just on the route say, I'm going to include values that are soft deleted. So you just do the route, you do the binding just like you normally would. It can still be implicit. And then you just put arrow with trashed at the end of that route. And that will automatically resolve those soft deleted models for you instead of returning a 404. That's what it is. That's pull request 51651. Graham Bradley contributed that one. I have needed this before, and I've had to do this before. So this is really nice, actually. So thanks, Graham, for contributing that one. We've also got the ability to set the resend API key directly in the mailer config instead of in the services config. So if you use resend, you can now set that directly inside of the mailer config. That's everything. That's everything in 11.10. There was a couple fixes as well, like some typos and things like that. But that is the vast majority of the changes that you'd be interested about in 11.10. Whew, there we go.
Woo. Made it. We survived.
Made it. We survived.
All right. Just the one news item, which, flip a coin, could be news, could be packages. But the Eloquent JoinWith package, written by Mohammed Safadi, lets you join existing has one and belongs to model relationships with a new JoinWith method. According to the package's README, JoinWith will execute a single query instead of two separate queries, which can translate to faster and more efficient queries. To use the package, you can either use the JoinWith trait or extend the package's provided JoinWith model class and then call the JoinWith method, which resembles the with method. So you would say something like user.op : JoinWith profile, and then select users.id, users.name, arrow first. And then it allows you to handle also nested relationships and more complex things where you want to use the query builder and provide some additional filtering on that. The package works specifically with has one and belongs to model relationships at the time of writing. Other relationships are unsupported. But you can learn more about the package and get full installation instructions and view the source code on GitHub. We'll have links to all of that in the show notes.
Very nice. Hey, we talked about this at the top of the show, but this episode is sponsored by Mailtrap, an email delivery platform that developers love. An email sending solution with industry best analytics, SMTP, and email API, SDKs for major programming languages, and 24/7 human support. You can try it for free at mailtrap.io. Thanks so much, Mailtrap, for sponsoring the show. Do you want me to read the next one?
I can go.
I can do it.
On to the packages.
On to packages. Here we go. Real-time command line monitoring with Laravel Top. Ooh. Hey, have you ever used HTOP?
Yes.
HTOP is good stuff. Also,
BTOP. Get onto BTOP.
BTOP? Oh man, I don't know what BTOP is. What is BTOP?
BTOP's an even prettier version of HTOP.
Ooh, okay. How about NCDU? Have you used NCDU before?
No. Do I have to look
It's like
this up?
disk usage. It's really good. So the other day I had a server that was filling up, the disk space was filling up. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, this is the third time I've had to add disk space in like 2 months. And like, what is happening? So I dug in. NCDU will scan your entire, will scan your machine. And then you can, it'll tell you, hey, this is, with little like pound symbols, it'll say like, this is where the most data is in this list. Then you drill into that and it'll say, this is where the most data, and you kind of like just shows you like percentage breakdown. Here's what it is. And then so you kind of just drill down into it and be like, oh, that's where all the time. Oh, it's in a telescope. It's in the telescope database table. What the heck? Like that's like 4 gigs. Okay, I need to start pruning that thing more often. So anyway, really good. NCDU. Okay. That's not what we're here to talk about, though. We're here to talk about Laravel Top. So this provides real-time monitoring directly from the command line for your Laravel applications. So it helps you track critical measures and metrics to see the busiest routes in your application. Since data is stored in Redis, theoretically, the top command output should represent data from all application servers, not just the specific server that you run the command from. So it works by listening to Laravel events, and from those events, it displays aggregated data that's stored in Redis to calculate these metrics. So this uses like a time to live, so that the data is stored for a short amount of time without historical data. It's based on the last 5 seconds of data. So PHP Artisan Top, they have a little GIF here of what it looks like when it's running. So we'll show you for this period of time. Here are the most frequently visited methods. The most frequently visited routes, how many requests you're getting per second, how much memory you're using, what your average response time is, your queries, and the average execution time on your database, as well as cache hits and things like that. So they're also available programmatically via the top facade that this package provides. So you can say request summary, average request per second, and whatever. Those things that we just talked about that you can get on that little command line dashboard. You can also get access to those from the top facade and then do whatever you'd like with those. So the README provides examples of programmatically accessing that data from Redis in your application, and you can read more about it on GitHub. Thanks, Paul Redmond, for writing that one up. It strikes me as a more real-time version of like Pulse, I think. It's kind of,
that was
it's
my
not
first
nearly
thinking.
as detailed, but it's like, it's what's happening right now. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily like
Yep.
what's happened over the last week or the last 24 hours, the last hour, even. It's like what's happened over the last 5 seconds, you know?
Mhm. Yep. Very cool. Especially for those of you command line fiends like me. I'd sit there and just have
Hmm.
that running somewhere all the time.
Yep.
The DB Auditor package for Laravel helps you audit your MySQL database standards and provides options to add missing constraints via the command line. The package can help you identify areas of your database that need work during development to optimize your production database and offers the following features: audit and review an existing MySQL database, scan MySQL databases to provide insights of MySQL standards and constraints, apply scan results automatically via the command line, and show a list of tables that fail audit and don't follow recommended standards. You can access all of the tools via Laravel's Artisan console. And one command that Paul Redmond, who wrote this article, found particularly interesting is the db:/track command, which gives you information about migrations, such as when they were created, the fields that were created, and which Git user created them. The project's README also includes instructions for enabling a web UI feature to see recommendations from the browser. We can link to the package for you in the show notes. It does things like we're doing standard status. Here you can use a char type instead of varchar if data values in the column are all of the same length. Spaces between words is not advised. Use underscores. This is for field names. Did you know that you can create MySQL fields with spaces in them?
I did not know this.
Today I learned. That sounds like it's going to cause all kinds of havoc.
Hmm.
It recommends not doing that. It recommends setting all of your field names to lowercase. Numbers are what is this? Numbers are not for names and is not advised. Please use alphabetical characters. Things like that. So all kinds of things that I suppose follow MySQL best practices in terms of how you would name things, how you would store things, and so on and so forth. So interesting package there. So thanks
Yeah,
to
I can
the
see this
author.
being useful for somebody jumping into like a database that they're or a project that they're wanting to sort of like do a refactor on, or wanting
Yeah.
to get a quick look at maybe some things that might possibly cause problems or be causing problems if it's a code base you're not familiar with. Just pulling this tool in and doing a little audit on it and be like, oh, okay, there's some interesting things we could fix up here. So that's
Yeah.
kind of cool.
A package from
It's like,
Vitor Cloud Technologies, who I believe they're based out of India and they're big supporters of the Laracon India conference. So yeah,
nice.
definitely check that out.
Very cool. Well, have you ever wanted to monitor your code processing time in PHP? If you're not using Ray, which you may be, but if you're not using Ray, which also does this and will output the stuff for you, which I just recently learned, but it's pretty cool. Time Warden can do it as well. So Time Warden is a lightweight PHP library that enables you to monitor the processing time of tasks and then take actions on thresholds exceeding the defined execution time limits. So it's probably best illustrated with an example from the README. So in there, you say Time Warden, which is just a global helper, Time Warden, and then task, you give it a name, checking articles, and then you arrow start. So this is where I'm starting this task. And then you go ahead and do your task. So you loop over a bunch of articles and you do your checks, whatever you're going to do. And then at the end, you say Time Warden stop. And then when you have that stop, you get to pass in a closure there that accepts the task. And then what you can do is you can define behavior in there based on how long the task is taking to complete. So if it says you've exceeded a certain amount of milliseconds when that task was being completed, you can send an email off to somebody, or you could throw something into Slack, or you could even report an error to Sentry. Right, you could send something to your error monitoring process. So this would be something where it's not necessarily an error, but it's something where you want to raise an alert. Hey, this is taking longer than it should, and we know that if it starts to take much longer, this job is going to fail because it's going to time out. So you could sort of give yourself a little bit of a threshold before that point and say, if it's taking longer than this, it's still completing, but if it's starting to get bigger, maybe we need to prune that database. Maybe we need to reduce the number of files that we're looping over per run, whatever it might be, right? So being able to monitor the amount of time it's taking and then respond to that is really what this Time Warden is doing for you. There's also another syntax you can use that allows you to use an arrow function instead of the traditional anonymous function. So that's in the show notes here. But There's really good documentation in the project's README, which in summary has the following features: monitoring processing time of critical tasks in both development and debugging, reactive actions when time is exceeded. So you can do both milliseconds, seconds, minutes, hours, execution time debugging output. So you can take a look at it as just for the purposes of debugging, measuring the execution time of an individual task or groups of tasks. This also is framework agnostic, meaning you can use it with Laravel, Symfony, standalone PHP application, etc. And it is PHP 8.2 plus. So you have to be at least on PHP 8.2 to make this work. They also mention in the in the notes here in the blog post that the output of tasks, which is pretty interesting, you can throw it right directly in your log, and it gives you this nice little markdown table looking thing where it just has like, hey, here's the task name, here's the duration, and here's what it was doing during this period of time. It looks really nice. You can tell they put some effort into making this look really digestible for the developer. So nice job on that. Let me see if there's an author here that I can give some. I don't think so. Tom Loprod. Not sure who that is, but Tom Loprod. Thomas is his name. Tom Loprod. Yeah. Good stuff. It looks very interesting, actually. Yeah. And like you said, I think, or not like you said, like I said, this is framework agnostic. So this is not just a Laravel thing. And I don't think Ray has the ability to do these sort of reactionary things based on the amount of time that something is taking to run. So yeah, looks interesting. Sounds like it could be helpful for a couple people.
Yeah. It's definitely good for tracking slow code paths, especially in production. Ray is very good during development, but you wouldn't typically ship it to production. Whereas this Time Warden package you could put into production, and you could sort of monitor these intermittent things and get notifications when some things are starting to be a bit slow. So
yeah, absolutely.
Good shout there, Thomas. All right. Tutorials. As I said at the top of the show, we have returned. We've got some tutorials. We haven't had many for a while, so I'm going to run through these three. Your homework, as always, with tutorials is to go and read these articles because they're too much to go through on air. The first one is an article by Paul Redmond talking about configuring Laravel with additional environment files. How many of you have forgotten to either configure the database in your PHPUnit.xml, or you haven't created a .env.testing and you've run PHP artisan test and then found that you've destroyed your local development database? So this talks about, this is the common one, right? You would create a .env for doing your development, but you'd have a .env.testing as well. At work, we've got like a .env.review that we keep in our version control, and we use 1Password to hydrate that file as part of the deploy process to the review environments. So we set the app env to review. The .env.review file is filled using credentials from 1Password, and then that is then used on all of our review environments. So you can do all this kind of stuff. And really, because we're using references to 1Password vaults, you can just commit that to version control. You never have to worry about secrets leaking or anything like that because
that's really
they're
nice.
never actually in there. So, this article talks about using different environments for different situations. As I said, .env.testing being the most common one. But you might have, if you're deploying to Docker, for example, you could have environments configured for your queue workers separately, to your web application separately, to your any artisan command runners. So definitely check that one out. The next article here from Paul Redmond as well is how to use Eloquent factories with PHPUnit data providers. If you've ever tried to have like a data set or a data provider with your test in order to use a single test function to test multiple scenarios, maybe you're testing different user types or different permissions, and you're trying to use a factory inside that data provider, the thing that you're going to run into is, because the data providers are run before the application is bootstrapped, you're going to run into errors because it doesn't yet know how to create a user factory, for example. So this talks about using, in PES, they're called bound context. I don't know if the terminology is the same in PHPUnit, but it helps you to do that kind of stuff. And we use them quite extensively in our test suite as well. So check that one out. And the last one, as I said, this is a big, meaty article from Ash Allen. This is the ultimate guide to Laravel validation. It talks about what validation is, why it's important, talking about client-side validation versus server-side validation, how Laravel specifically handles validation, and then validating data either automatically or manually, validating using form requests. It goes on and talks about some handy validation rules, how to validate arrays and arrays of data and all of that kind of stuff. So, I've said a lot. There's a lot of stuff happening here. I'm about halfway, 40% through scrolling through this article. So it might be a couple of sittings to get through it, but it is good. Ash always provides good value content, and he's always putting his stuff out into the world. So thank you very much, Ash, for that article. And that is all that we have.
Nicely done. Yep. Thanks, folks, for hanging out with us. This was episode 216. You can find show notes for this episode at podcast.laravelnews.com, .laravel-news.com, /216. If you liked the show, we would really appreciate it if you'd rate it up in your podcatcher of choice. That'd be amazing. 5 stars would be awesome. And of course, if you have any questions, hit us up on Twitter at Michael, Dorinda, at Jacob Bennett, or at Laravel News. Thanks, folks. And until next time, we'll see you.
Bye.